The most dangerous creature ever to pass through my quarantine station weighed about as much as a sack of grain, had a tail it could not stop wagging, and was, by every instrument I owned, completely harmless, and the machine that tested it flagged it as an unlimited threat, and it took me the rest of my career to understand that the machine was right, and that I'd been measuring the wrong thing my entire life. Let me tell you who I am, because the smallness of my job is the whole frame of this. I was a quarantine inspector, biological import control, junior grade, at a way station on the edge of Apex Council space, the Apex Council being the great governing body of our region, the assembly of the established peoples, the ones who set the rules that everyone else lived by. My station was nothing grand. It was a port, a customs-end quarantine checkpoint on a busy lane, the kind of place where the galaxy's traffic slows down to be inspected before it's allowed deeper in. My job was organisms. Anything alive that came through, livestock, specimens, pets, pests, the 1,000 living things that move with a traveling galaxy passed across my desk, and I ran the tests, and I decided what was safe to admit and what had to be quarantined or turned away or, in the worst cases, destroyed. It was unglamorous work, and I was good at it, and I believed in it, because a careless port is how a plague or an invasive predator or an engineered weapon slips into civilized space, and the inspectors are the quiet line that keeps that from happening. The central tool of my trade was the assessor. Every quarantine station had one, a council-built biological assessment system, an immense database and analysis engine that could take a genetic sample from any organism and tell you what it was, where it came from, and most importantly what threat it posed. You'd swab the creature, feed the sample to the assessor, and it would return a profile, species, origin, and a threat level, calculated from the assessor's vast records of every organism the council had ever catalogued and every harm any of them had ever done. The threat level was the number that mattered. It told you whether the thing on your inspection table was a houseplant or a hazard. I trusted the assessor completely. In 15 years it had never been wrong, because it was not really an opinion. It was the accumulated experience of the entire council, the distilled memory of every dangerous thing the galaxy had ever encountered, rendered into a single number. I want to give you a sense of an ordinary day because the ordinariness is what makes the rest of it land. Most of what crossed my desk was nothing: a trader's draft animals, a family's household pet, a crate of agricultural specimens, a tank of food fish. You swabbed, you fed the sample to the assessor, you got a number, almost always low, and you stamped the manifest and waved them through. Now and then something interesting, a genuinely dangerous import, a venomous thing, an invasive species that would have wrecked a biosphere if it got loose, once an engineered organism that some fool was trying to smuggle that the assessor flagged at the top of its scale, and I quarantined it and felt the quiet pride of the inspector who'd caught the thing before it got in. That was the job. That was the rhythm of 15 years. The assessor handed me a number, and the number was always right, and I built my whole professional life on the certainty of it. And the thing about that certainty is that it had a shape I never questioned. The assessor measured the organism. That was the unspoken foundation of everything, that a creature's threat lived inside the creature, in its biology, its venom, its claws, its capacity to breed or infect or kill. Threat was a property of the thing on the table. You swabbed the thing, and the swab told you how dangerous the thing was, because dangerous was a thing a creature was. In 15 years, it had never once occurred to me to ask whether a creature's threat could live somewhere other than inside the creature, whether a thing could be harmless in itself and dangerous because of what stood behind it, what loved it, what would come for you if you touched it. The assessor had never made me ask that question, because in 15 years the assessor had never met a dog. And then a human came through my station with a dog, and the assessor returned a number I had never seen, and the number was not a number at all. I should explain that humanity was new to us then, present in council space, a young member species, regarded the way the established powers always regard the newcomers, which is with a faint condescension and not much real attention. We knew the basics. We did not know them well. And we certainly did not know about the creatures they brought with them, the animals they'd carried up from their cradle world into the stars. Because why would we? What does it matter to a galactic power what small beasts a young species keeps? The human was a traveler named Cole. Older, weathered, traveling alone except for the animal, the kind of quiet, unremarkable person who passes through a port without anyone remembering his face. And the animal was a dog. I didn't know the word then. I learned it later. To me, it was simply an unknown organism accompanying a traveler, a four-legged creature, middling-sized, covered in fur, with an open, panting mouth and a tail in constant motion, and a way of looking at its human that I had no framework for at all. It was old, I could tell that much. There was gray in its muzzle and a stiffness in how it moved. And it was, by every visible sign, the least threatening thing I had ever had on my table. It was friendly, absurdly friendly. When I approached, it tried to lean against me. When my assistant came near, it wagged harder. It was a creature that appeared to have no concept of an enemy, no wariness, no edge of danger anywhere in it. A soft, old, affectionate animal that a young species had, for reasons I didn't understand, considered worth the enormous trouble and expense of bringing to the stars. But I noticed the bond before I noticed anything else, even before the assessor, and I should tell you about it, because it was the first strange thing, and I dismissed it the way I dismissed everything that didn't fit. Cole and the animal moved as a unit, not in the way a person moves with luggage, or even with livestock, in the way two parts of one thing move. When Cole stopped at my desk, the dog stopped too and sat and pressed itself against his leg, and Cole's hand dropped to its head without his looking, the unconscious touch of someone who always knows exactly where the other one is. And the animal watched him. That was the part I had no category for. Most creatures in a strange place watch the strange place. They scan for threats, for exits, for the unfamiliar. This one barely glanced at my station, at me, at the swirl of a busy port full of aliens it had presumably never seen. It watched Cole. Its whole attention was on the one person, checking his face, reading him, orienting on him the way a compass orients on a pole, as though the entire vast strange galaxy were of no concern whatsoever as long as he was there. And Cole, for his part, was gentle with it in a way that struck me as disproportionate to a beast. He talked to it low, easy, a constant murmur, the way you talk to a person, not the commands you give an animal. When the dog's old hip struggled to lower it to the floor, his hand was there, steadying before I'd even seen the struggle. When I reached to swab it and it tensed just slightly, he said something soft and it settled, and he said to me, "She's all right. She's just old. Loud places are hard on her now. Be quick if you can. Be quick if you can." A traveler at a quarantine desk, with a galactic threat database about to render judgment on his animal, and his only concern was that the inspection not be hard on an old dog's nerves. I logged it at the time as the sentimentality of a lonely person who'd attached too much meaning to a pet. I understand now that I was watching the most powerful force in the galaxy, in its quietest and most ordinary form, and that I'd very nearly missed it entirely. Procedure was procedure. An unknown organism gets assessed. I swabbed the dog, it licked my hand while I did it, and I fed the sample to the assessor, expecting the readout that every harmless creature got. Species, origin, threat level negligible, admitted. I'd done it 10,000 times. I wasn't even watching the screen closely. And then my assistant made a sound, and I looked, and the assessor had returned something I had never seen in 15 years. It hadn't returned a threat number. The threat field, which always held a value, a clean calculated figure between 0 and the maximum, did not hold a number. It held a word, and above it, where the origin field should have listed a world and a species classification, the assessor had returned something equally strange. The full readout said, organism non-hazardous, independent threat negligible. Owner Earth. Threat level unlimited. I read it 3 times. It made no sense. The organism itself was non-hazardous. The assessor agreed with my own eyes. The dog posed no independent threat. It was exactly the soft, harmless creature it appeared to be. And yet the overall threat level was not negligible, was not even high, was unlimited, a classification I did not know the assessor could even return, a word where a number should be. The system's way of saying that the danger here exceeded its scale, ran off the end of every measurement it possessed. And the owner field, not origin, owner read simply, Earth, the whole planet. As though this one small, old, friendly animal were the registered property of an entire world. And as though that ownership were the source of a threat the assessor could not put a number to. I want you to understand how frightening that was, to someone who trusted the assessor the way I did. The assessor was never wrong, and the assessor was never dramatic. It dealt in clean numbers, in calm classifications. It had no capacity for hyperbole because it was a database, not a storyteller. For it to return unlimited was not the system being excitable. It was the system reporting, in the only words it had, that it had found, attached to this harmless old animal, a threat that genuinely had no upper bound, and that the source of that boundless threat was somehow the creature's ownership. Its belonging to Earth, to the humans, to the quiet, weathered man standing at my inspection desk, watching me read a readout that had just told me his dog was the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. My first instinct was that the assessor had malfunctioned. Of course it was. 15 years of a machine that returns clean numbers, and suddenly it returns a word. The obvious conclusion is a fault, a corrupted record, a glitch in a system that handles 1,000 samples a day. So I did what any inspector would do. I reran it. I took a fresh sample, fed it in clean, watched the screen the whole way this time. And the assessor returned exactly the same thing, non-hazardous organism, owner Earth, threat level unlimited, and it returned it faster the second time, with the particular promptness the system had when it was certain, when the answer was already deep in its records and didn't need to be calculated fresh. The assessor was not struggling with this sample. It was not confused by it. It knew exactly what it was looking at, had clearly looked at something like it before, and was reporting its finding with complete confidence. The word unlimited was not an error. It was the assessor's considered, certain judgment, rendered twice. So then I did the thing you do when the machine insists on an answer that makes no sense. I went looking for why. I queried the assessor for the basis of the classification. Every assessment carried its reasoning, the records the judgment was drawn from, so an inspector could see why a thing was rated as it was. And the basis of this one was not biological at all. That was the thing that started to turn me cold. The unlimited rating did not draw on the dog's genetics, its anatomy, its capacity to harm. It drew on a different category of record entirely, a category I'd never had cause to look at, a behavioral file, a file about humans, a file the council had apparently built from incidents, from events, from things that had happened when someone in the galaxy had done harm to a creature that a human had marked as theirs. The assessor wasn't rating the dog at all. The dog was just the trigger. The assessor had recognized the category the dog belonged to, a thing owned, loved, claimed by a human, and had pulled the threat rating not from the animal, but from the long-read history of what humans did when that category of thing was harmed. And there was a great deal in that file. I could see the size of it before I read a word of it, a thick, heavy record, far larger than a young newcomer species should have generated, the assessor's accumulated memory of every time the galaxy had learned, the hard way, what stood behind a human's beloved creature. I had not yet read it. But I could see how big it was, and I looked up from the size of that file at the soft, old, friendly dog leaning against the weathered man's leg, and I felt the first cold edge of understanding that I had been, my entire career, profoundly wrong about where danger lived. I looked up at him, at Cole, at the unremarkable human and his soft, old, affectionate dog, the friendliest creature I had ever inspected, flagged by the most reliable instrument in council space as an unlimited threat owned by an entire planet. And I asked him the only thing I could think to ask, which was, "What is this animal?" And Cole looked down at the dog, and the dog looked up at him, and something passed between them that I had never seen pass between a person and a beast, and Cole said, "Her name's Bo. She's my dog. She's about the least dangerous thing you'll ever meet." And then he looked at my screen, at the word unlimited glowing where a number should be, and something in his weathered face went quiet and knowing, and he said, "Oh, that. Your machine's not measuring her. It's measuring what I'd do to anyone who tried to hurt her, and it's right. That part really doesn't have a limit." That's where I have to stop this first time. Because what Cole meant, what the assessor had actually detected, and why an entire galaxy's threat database returned the word unlimited when it looked at the bond between a tired old man and his soft old dog, and what it taught me about the species we'd all dismissed as harmless newcomers. That's the whole of the story, and I need you standing exactly here first. At a quarantine desk on the edge of council space, looking at the friendliest creature I had ever inspected, and a readout that called it the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, beginning to understand that my reliable, never-wrong assessor had not malfunctioned at all. It had simply, for the first time in my career, measured something other than teeth. I read the file that night, after Cole and Bo had been cleared and given a berth, after I'd told them against every regulation that I needed a day before I could finalize their paperwork, which was a lie, because what I actually needed was to understand what my own machine had just told me. I sat alone at my station after the port went quiet, and I opened the behavioral file the assessor had drawn its judgment from, the thick red record of what humans do when something they love is harmed, and I read it until the lights came up, and I was a different inspector by morning. The file did not begin with humans. That was the first thing that surprised me. It began, the way these things do, with the galaxy's long experience of animals, because every species keeps creatures, beasts of burden and livestock and the occasional pet, and the Council's threat assessment had a whole settled science of how a creature's owner behaves when the creature is threatened. And that settled science had a rule, an old reliable rule that held across 200 species. The value a being places on an owned creature is proportional to the creature's usefulness. Harm a species' draft animals and they'll be angry because draft animals are valuable. Harm their livestock and they'll demand compensation because livestock is wealth. But the response is always proportional. It scales with the creature's worth, with what its loss costs, because that is how rational beings relate to property, and every species in the Council was, in this respect, rational. You could predict the response from the value of the creature. The assessor had done so, reliably, for centuries. And then humans joined the Council, and the rule broke. The file documented the breaking, incident by incident, and I read them with a growing cold. The pattern was always the same, and it was always wrong by the galaxy's settled science. A human's creature would be harmed, and not a valuable creature, that was the thing, not a beast of burden or a herd animal or anything with measurable worth, but a pet, a companion animal, a thing of no economic value whatsoever, often old, often useless, often a creature that by every rational metric should have provoked at most mild annoyance at its loss. And the human response would be total, not proportional, total. Out of all relation to the creature's worth, because the human was not, it turned out, responding to the creature's worth at all, was responding to something the galaxy's settled science had no variable for, something that did not scale with usefulness, that did not diminish with the creature's age or uselessness, that seemed, in fact, to have no ceiling whatsoever. There was the incident that anchored the whole file, the one the assessor flagged as the origin of the unlimited classification, the first time the galaxy learned what it was dealing with. A trading concern, a large and powerful one, had been moving through a frontier region where some human settlers lived, and there had been a dispute, the petty kind, over landing rights or water or some small frontier thing, and the trading concern had done what powerful concerns do to small settlers, which was lean on them, push them, demonstrate who held the power. And in the course of demonstrating it carelessly, almost incidentally, the way you'd kick something out of your path, someone from the concern had killed a settler's dog. Not a person, a dog, an old one by the records. A companion animal of no value, belonging to one human family on a frontier nobody cared about. The trading concern had expected nothing. Why would they expect anything? They'd killed an animal worth less than the fuel in their ships, belonging to powerless settlers, in a dispute the settlers had already effectively lost. By every rule the galaxy ran on, the matter was beneath consequence. What followed did not fit any rule the galaxy had. The human whose dog it was, one man, a settler, a nobody, did not let it go, did not accept compensation which was offered eventually when the concern realized something was wrong, did not respond proportionally because there was no proportion in him to respond with. He simply, methodically, and with a patience that the file's analysts clearly found more frightening than any rage, set about the ruin of the trading concern. Not violently, that's the part the file kept circling back to, the part that made the unlimited rating. He didn't attack them. He did something the galaxy found far more alarming, which was refused to stop across years, by every legal and economic and social means a determined person can find, with a focus that never wavered and never burned out and never ever accepted that the matter was closed. He pursued the concern's reputation, its contracts, its standing, its alliances. He made the killing of his dog into a thing the concern could not get away from, could not pay off, could not outlast, because he would not outlast. He had decided, it seemed, to spend the entire remainder of his life, if necessary, ensuring that the people who killed his dog were sorry, and a being who will spend the remainder of his life on a thing cannot be deterred, because deterrence requires that the target value something more than the goal, and this man valued nothing more than this. The trading concern was ruined. A large, powerful, established concern, brought down over years by one settler whose dog they'd killed, and the galaxy watched it happen and did not understand it and filed it, carefully, frightened, under a new heading, because the old science of proportional response had just failed catastrophically and the council needed to know why. And the why, which the file's analysts had eventually arrived at and which I read at my dark station with the cold spreading through me, was this. Humans did not value their companion creatures by usefulness. They valued them by love, and love in humans was not a proportional quantity. It did not scale with worth. A human's bond to a useless old dog could be exactly as total as its bond to its own child, because the bond was not about the creature's value. It was about the choosing, the having decided to love, and once a human had chosen to love a thing, the defense of that thing became unlimited, because love in this species came without a ceiling. They would do for a beloved animal precisely what they would do for a beloved person, which was anything, without limit, forever. And there was no variable for that in 200 species worth of settled science, because no other species loved that way. Loved down the ladder of usefulness all the way to the bottom, loved old useless creatures with the same boundless ferocity they loved their own kind. And so no other species had ever needed a threat rating that simply read unlimited, because no other species had ever produced a being who would burn down an empire over a dog and consider it a fair trade. That was what my assessor had detected, not the dog, never the dog. The dog was non-hazardous, exactly as the readout said. What was unlimited was the thing standing behind the dog, the quiet, weathered man with his hand resting on an old gray muzzle, who had answered my question. What is this animal, with the truest and most frightening thing anyone has ever said at my desk. Your machine's not measuring her. It's measuring what I'd do to anyone who tried to hurt her, and that part really doesn't have a limit. That's where I have to stop this first time. Because what I learned about Cole specifically, about why he and Bo were traveling alone to the edge of council space, and what had already happened to bring them there, and the thing I did when I finally understood that the most dangerous creature in the galaxy was an old dog because of how completely one tired man loved her. That's the resolution, the whole of it, and I need you standing exactly here first. Alone at a dark quarantine desk, having just read the long read proof that the galaxy's most boundless threat is not a weapon or a fleet or a predator, but a human who has decided to love something, and the simple, unlimited fact of what they will do to keep it safe. I went to find Cole in the morning and I told him I'd read the file, and I asked him the question I'd been holding all night, which was where he and Bo were going, alone, all the way out here to the edge of everything. And he told me, and it was not what I expected, and it broke the last of the inspector I'd been. They weren't running from anything. That was my first wrong guess, that a man flagged as an unlimited threat must be fleeing some consequence, some ruin he'd left behind him like the settler in the file. He wasn't. Cole was just an old man taking an old dog to see something before the end. She's dying, he said. We were sitting in the berth they'd been given, Bo stretched out between us on the floor, her gray muzzle on his foot, her breathing slow. Not from anything anyone did, just old, her time. The vets back home gave her a few months and I thought. He stopped and started again, the way people do when the thing is too big for the first sentence. We had a place we used to go, before I went to the stars, before any of this. A ridge above a lake back on Earth where I'd take her when she was young and she'd run the whole shoreline like the world was made of joy. She can't run anymore. But I got it into my head that I wanted her to see one more impossible thing before she goes. Something big. Something she'd never have seen if I'd left her in the yard her whole life. There's a nebula out past this lane. You can see it with the naked eye from the right vantage. A whole sky of it, the most beautiful thing in this region, they say. I'm taking her to see it. That's all. That's the whole dangerous mission your machine flagged. An old man, taking his dying dog to look at some pretty lights, because he can't stand the thought of her last months being small. And I sat there, the quarantine inspector, the one who'd read the long red file about the ruin of empires, and I looked at the most dangerous creature in the galaxy asleep on her owner's foot, dying of nothing but age, on her way to see a nebula because the man who loved her couldn't bear to give her an ordinary ending. And I understood the whole of it, finally, all at once, and it was the opposite of frightening. It was the most moving thing I have ever encountered, and it had been sitting at my desk wearing the readout of a weapon. Because the file was true, every word of it. Cole would burn down an empire for this dog. I had no doubt of it, sitting there, none. The assessor was not wrong. The threat was real and it was unlimited. But the file only ever recorded the threat, because the file was built by a galaxy that could only see danger, that had a category for what humans do when you hurt the thing they love and no category at all for the thing itself, for the love, for the actual content of the bond that made the threat possible. The galaxy had measured the shadow and never once looked at what cast it. And what cast it was this: an old man on the floor of a berth, murmuring to a dying dog, taking her across the stars to see something beautiful, for no reason at all except that he loved her past all sense and could not do otherwise. The unlimited threat and the unlimited tenderness were the same thing. They were not two facts about humans. They were one fact, seen from two sides. The reason a human will destroy anything to protect what they love is the same reason a human will cross a galaxy to give a dying dog one last beautiful thing. Because the love has no ceiling, and a love with no ceiling produces, depending on which way you're standing, either the gentlest devotion in the universe or the most boundless wrath, and they are the same force, and you do not get one without the other. The galaxy had only ever seen the wrath, because the galaxy had only ever shown up when something was already being threatened. No one had ever bothered to look at a human and a dog on an ordinary day, when nothing was wrong, and see the love that was the whole engine of the thing. No one except, now, me, by accident, because my machine had flagged an old dog and I'd been curious enough to ask why. I cleared them. Of course I cleared them. The organism was non-hazardous. The readout said so itself. And there is no regulation against a man loving his dog, though I think if there were the council might have written it, frightened as they were of the thing they'd measured and never understood. I cleared them, and I did one more thing, a small thing, the only thing in my power. The nebula they were going to see lay just outside the lane my station controlled, and the approach to the best vantage was technically restricted space, the kind of thing a junior inspector could either enforce or quietly not. I gave Cole a clearance. A real one, stamped, official, granting one human vessel passage to the vantage point, for the purpose. I wrote this in the manifest, in the official record of the Apex Council, and I have never been prouder of anything I wrote for the purpose of allowing a registered companion animal to view the nebula. It is, as far as I know, the only document in the Council's entire archive that authorizes an act of pure love, and I filed it under the same threat classification the assessor had returned, because it amused me, and because it was true. Threat level unlimited, purpose, to show a dying dog the stars. They went. I watched the little human vessel leave my station and take the restricted lane out toward the nebula, carrying the most dangerous creature in the galaxy and the boundless gentle force that owned her. And I stood at my port and felt the entire shape of my career rearrange behind me. I don't know if Bo saw the nebula. I like to think she did, that Cole carried her to a viewport, her old body in his arms, and held her up to a sky full of impossible light, and murmured to her the way he always did, and that for a moment a dying dog from Earth looked out at the most beautiful thing in our region of the galaxy, and was, in the way dogs are, simply happy, because the person she loved was holding her. I never heard from them again. They were just a traveler and his dog. They passed through my station the way 10,000 things passed through it, and they did not come back, and that's how it should be. The most important things mostly pass through quietly and don't come back. But I changed after them. I stopped trusting the assessor's numbers the way I had, because I understood now that the numbers only ever measured the danger, and never the thing the danger was made of. When a human came through after that, and more did, as the years went on, I learned to look not at the threat rating but at what they loved, because the two were the same and only one of them was worth knowing. And I learned the thing that the whole galaxy, with all its science and all its records, had managed to miss about the newcomers it dismissed as harmless. That they were, in fact, the most dangerous species any of us had ever encountered, exactly as the assessor said, and that the danger was not a flaw in them, not a savagery, not a thing to be feared and contained. It was love, just love with no ceiling on it, the same force that made them the gentlest creatures in the galaxy, seen from the other side. People tell this story now as the one about the human whose dog the machine couldn't measure, the threat level that read unlimited, the species so dangerous a database ran out of numbers. And they tell it as a warning, a humans are terrifying story, and every time I hear it told that way I want to stop them, because they've got it backwards, the way I had it backwards at first. The machine wasn't warning us about a weapon. It was warning us about a love so total it had no limit, and the proof of it was not a fleet or a bomb or a monster. It was an old dog, dying of nothing but years, being carried across the stars to see something beautiful by a tired man who would have unmade the galaxy before he let anything hurt her, and who instead just wanted her to see the lights. That's the most dangerous thing there is. I've spent my whole life since learning to be grateful that it's also the most beautiful. Threat level unlimited. It was the truest reading my machine ever gave. I just spent 15 years thinking unlimited was a word about destruction. Turns out it was always a word about love.